My name is Barbara McGillivray. I'm Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Open Humanities Data, or JOHD for short. And I'm joined today by our lovely attendees and Sophia, who is Corradino, who has been coordinating the organization of this event, and by Tanya Gaustad van Sanen, who is going to be giving a talk about her experience as an author of JOHD, although she's also now part of the team in double role as associate editor and copy editor. So she's got lots of experience to share from many different angles. So the event will be as follows. There will be Tanya's talk and then an opportunity for you to ask questions. We also have questions that we received in advance that we're going to answer. I will just say a few words about the journal in general to introduce you to it, and then I'll pass it on to Tanya. So I will be sharing my screen and show you the journal's website, which I find is the best way to give you a sense of the journal and also help you find your way around the website. Okay, so JOHD this journal was launched in 2015 by Ubiquity Press, and at the time, Ubiquity Press wanted to experiment with launching journals that published non-traditional research outputs like data or code. So the Journal of Open Humanities Data is a data journal for the humanities. So we publish papers that are focused on data sets. And you'll hear more about the details of this from Tanya, but just as a brief overview, we publish two types of papers. Data papers are short descriptions of data sets, so openly available research outputs or research objects. Could be a database, could be a file, image, archive, corpus, and so on. And then we also publish discussion papers, which are longer narratives that go into a bit more depth and a bit more theory on issues, challenges, ideas for processing, analyzing, accessing humanities data. And the scope of the journal is very broad. It's a whole of humanities. So we also have launched collections that are on specific themes. So I invite you to have a look at the list of special collections that we have open at the moment, but we also have past ones that we published on various topics and subfields of the humanities. And in addition to special collections, we of course have an open call for papers on a rolling basis. So we accept submissions at any point of year. The journal has been growing significantly in the past few years. I took it over as editor-in-chief in 2019, and the growth has been significant since then, both in terms of the team, but also in terms of the number of submissions. And also the size and so scope of the activities that we carry out. So we do events, we talk at events, we organize our own events. We also publish about data papers. So we have done research on the effect of data papers. And recently we celebrated our 10th anniversary. So you will be able to find information about these in the events tab. I'll be talking about our social media presence at the end, just to stay in touch with us. But I'll just say one more thing, which is that the journal is a gold open access journal. This means that the articles are openly available to anyone who wants to read them without any fee for that. But the cost is then bet by at the point of the manuscript being accepted. So normally the expectation is that the author has funding from their institution or their research grant funder to cover the cost of producing and publishing the paper so that it can be read for free. And the details of this are in the submissions page and the publication phase. So the cost is £1,070 at the moment, and it's a result of the fact that we do grant a lot of waivers. So we had to increase the price so that we can afford to have some authors not paid, because if you don't have access to the funds, you can just say that in your cover letter when you submit the paper, and then you are basically asking for a waiver, which we normally always grant if you can prove you don't have access to funds. And so this is sort of a model that not everyone may be super familiar with. Right, so I think that ends my few words introducing the journal, and then I'm passing on over to Tanya, who will talk about her experience as an author of JOHD.
Thanks, Barbara. So Barbara has already introduced me a bit, but I will be talking a bit more about who I am to start with, because, I mean, you probably want to know why I'm even qualified to be talking to you. So my background originally is in linguistics. I did an MA in French philology and general linguistics in Basel in Switzerland. But then I moved into computational linguistics for my PhD, which was on word sense disambiguation and done in Groningen in the Netherlands. And since I got my PhD, I worked in very, very many different roles. So I've been in industry doing transcription, translation, things like pronunciation lexicons, and I even did research on authorship attribution. I've also been working in academia. I'm back in academia currently, but you know, there were stints in between with other things. And at the moment, I'm mainly building and annotating corpora and developing core technologies. And I've also worked in semi-government organizations as a data scientist and working on information management and research data management. So a lot of different hats. At this stage, I'm based in South Africa. And I work at CText, which stands for the Center for Text Technologies, and we focus on textual data and language technologies for South African languages. And as Barbara has already pointed out, since January 2026, I joined the team at JOHD as a section editor and copy editor. So again, several hats that I'm wearing here. My history with JOHD as an author is actually, I'm fortunate enough to have 2 publications with JOHD, 2 data papers. So one is on morphologically annotated corpora for 9 South African languages, and the other one are data sets that we built for machine translation of the South African languages. So both data papers, but slightly different focus. Let me start. So I think it's sort of obvious if you take a step back, but a lot of people don't realize how complex and heterogeneous data in the humanities actually can be. And a big difference to what a lot of people think as well, quite often the data is more descriptive and not just numerical. And one thing I've also learned now reading lots of data papers is that the critical analysis part of it is really, really essential in the humanities. So context and meaning bring something extra to the table rather than just sort of looking at your data purely as sort of objects in a way. The other thing to realize as well is there's lots of modalities. So you can have textual data, which is what I'm working with mainly. You can also have audio data. You can have video data. You can work on images or scans, for instance, for historical documents or historical photos. There's also maps that are being used in research, for instance, and I'm sure there's many more, and you can sort of add them to the list. So from my personal perspective, data for me is something that I use in language technology and digital linguistics, so more the digital humanities, but then more the linguistic side of it. And as I pointed out, I mainly work with textual data, but we've also done work on speech recordings. with transcriptions included, which is a different kind of bit different to work with. And we focus on collection of what is called corpora, which are large bodies of electronic data. And there we have different ones. So we have monolingual ones where you just have the one language. There's some are bilingual or multilingual, and then not necessarily the same data, but just several languages represented in the corpora. And then we also work on parallel line corpora for machine translations. And I think the thing that distinguishes the work that we do is that we actually enhance the corpora that we have, the collection of text, by adding annotations. So we do morphological annotations, but also syntactic functions of words, which we call parts of speech, or named entities, which is the representation of persons or locations or organizations. And I think to summarize, for me personally, for the work I do, data is kind of the bread and butter that I need to be able to develop basic language technologies. So I need data to be able to recognize sentences and words in given languages. And I also need data, annotated data, to be able to then automatically annotate further data with morphology or part of speech. But now, why is it important to share data? So from a South African perspective, I can say South African languages, most South African languages at least, are resource scarce. This means only very little data exists. And there are quite a few challenges we face when we're collecting data for such languages. So one is that for some of them, the internet presence is actually very, very small. Another thing is it's very difficult to legally acquire a diversity of different types of texts. So newspaper text, which for English-speaking people is like the data that's out there to just go and collect. Unfortunately for South African languages, there's copyright issues, so we can't just collect them and use them. Another thing is that a lot of the languages here have more of an oral culture. So a lot of the stories, like something like children's stories, for instance, would not be written down, but would be passed down orally. And then if you want to collect that data, you don't find any written trace of them, unfortunately. And then lastly, there are historical disadvantages because during apartheid, some of the languages were not allowed to have a presence in that sense. So they were not allowed to be published, etc. And that, well, lasted until 1994, which is quite a long time. Another reason why it's important to share your data is to be able to use what you've collected, you need to do some pre-processing. So you have to sort of make sure the data that you collected is actually realistic, but there's not a lot of noise in it that you can't use. But you also want to be transparent in what was done and why it was done, for instance. And then another thing that is close to my heart as well is that you'd like to produce data that is reusable beyond your original research project, right? So I work in language technology, but that's close enough to linguistics that hopefully linguists might be interested by the data I collect as well, and potentially other research areas as well. Also, I think sharing is caring, they say. So I think sharing data can help everyone, but I would like to place the footnote there. It has to be done in a principled way, because otherwise, if people don't know what you've done with your data, they can't really work with it afterwards. And I think one of the things that is really, really nice about JOHD is usually it's quite difficult to publish on data alone, right? Most papers or manuscripts you see are going to be like this. There's going to be part on data, and then the rest is going to be on some research question that was answered using that data. But in my case, working with data, collecting it is actually the core of my work. And it's really, really nice to be able to publish about that I spend a lot of my time on. And I think a data paper helps you in that sense because it asks you to have a rigorous description of your data set, but it also makes sure your data set is visible and your data paper is then citable. And last but not least, it is peer reviewed. So you do have experts chiming in and telling you what is actually interesting about your data or what could be improved. Then lastly, I think one thing a lot of people maybe don't know about, but that is very, very important in our interconnected era, I guess you can say, is there's the FAIR principles, which is a set of guidelines that are used to optimize the use of digital assets and research data. And FAIR stands for findable, which means you do have metadata and persistent identifiers, for instance, a digital object identifier, JOHD. It's also accessible, so the data and the metadata are retrievable via standardized protocols. It should be interoperable, preferably, so you want to use standardized formats to facilitate the exchange with other data sets and with other disciplines as well, if possible. And lastly, it should be reusable. So you should include documentation, licensing. We'll come back to that in a bit as well. Licensing information is very important. And you should, if you can, conform to your community standards, because that will guarantee that other people will be able to use your data as well. So that's background on data and data papers. But now let's zoom in into how JOHD works with data papers. So I called it Data Paper 101. On the right-hand side, you see an excerpt of the template that is shared via the JOHD website. So if you plan on submitting something, the first thing you do, you go there and you actually download that template, which is going to help guide you write your data paper. And for each of the sections that you're supposed to write about, you get guidelines. So you can see at the bottom, you've got some text in blue, and those are guidelines for you as an author, which tell you what to do or not to do, for instance. One thing that is important to remember before you start writing your data paper is that preferably your data set should already be available in a publicly accessible repository. So that means you should have cleared your intellectual property, hopefully before you started collecting your data, and you should have your licensing in order as well. For me personally, I use a repository that is called SADiLaR, that is from the South African Digital Language Resource Center. And one of the challenges with that repository is that it is curated. That means if I submit my data, a person will first need to look at it and make sure all the necessary metadata, etc., is available, and then they give the okay to actually publish it in the repository. So that's something I usually have to take into account, that there will be some time between me depositing my data and the moment it is actually publicly available. So that's something you have to kind of time with your submission as well. But what else do you need to put in your data paper? So there's basically 4 sections. There's the overview section, where you explain why your data set was created. You have the method section, where you explain how your data was created. And then in the description, it's actually a very detailed description, as the name says, of what your data set contains. And then lastly, the reuse potential. How can other researchers possibly benefit from your data set as well? And I'll now go through each of them in more detail to give you a better idea of what to expect there. So the overview. Why was your data set created to start with? So what's the background? Is it a project you were working on? Is it your PhD thesis or maybe your M thesis? And this section will also indicate the location of your data set. You're going to have your DOI or another stable identifier there that points to in what repository and where someone can actually access your data. That is really, really important for a data paper. So one of the challenges we had, I remember, for our data set was that we actually had more than one handle because we had more than one language, and each language had its own data handle. So on the right, you see how we, what our solution was. We just listed them, but that was something we had to think about because it's not quite the standard way. Most people just have the one. And then the context for me was, so I usually work on research projects, and the data sets form part of the project deliverables. So in a way, I maybe have an advantage because I know from the beginning of the research project that I will have to have those data sets delivered. The challenge here with the overview, with the writing of the overview section, is mainly what you include here without giving away too much of the methodology or the data description later. So that's what you get with every paper, I think, sort of trying to figure out what to put where and how much to say from the beginning and not stealing your own thunder further down in the paper. Then the second section is going to be your method section. How did you actually create your data? So you have to ask yourself questions like, what processing steps did I follow? Did I sample my data? How did I evaluate the quality of my data? And other things in the same train of thought. Here, I think the main challenge, to be honest, is to avoid too much technical jargon. It's really easy to forget that we're trying to publish this not just for our peers within like our small set of like our small domain, let's say, and we want to make it interesting for people that are outside our field of interest as well. But at the same time, it has to stay reproducible. So again, a bit of a balancing act, I think, between what you do. Then the third section you will need in your data paper is the description of your data set itself. So I personally think that is really the core of your data paper, because it gives someone who's interested in what you've done a very quick overview of what it contains at a meta level. So you're showing information on copyright, file format, etc. So on the right-hand side there, you see the different subsections that you get in the dataset description. And this is the example of one of my papers where you get like the object name. We detail the format names, like what type of files do you have? Is it TXT? Is it Excels? Is it CSV files or something like that? When it was created, who created it, languages, and then licensing, which is very important, and the repository name, like where did you deposit your data? So the challenge here, and I think maybe there will be a few questions on that, is the data licensing. So I think it's very important to think about that when you start collecting your data already, because the licensing is a legal arrangement really between you as a data creator and then the end user, and it specifies what a user can do with the data, as you can have commercial licenses or non-commercial licenses, etc., etc. And one of the most widely used family of copyright licenses is Creative Commons. So there's various flavors in there that you can, there's a whole website that details all the different ones that you can use. And you just have to make sure that it actually works with your data in what you want the user to be able to do with it. As a side note here, so there's a new license that a lot of people studying African and other under-resourced languages use nowadays, which is called Noodle, which is the NVU Lite Obodo Open Data License, and it puts more emphasis on the providers, the original providers of the data, than the Creative Commons actually does. I think a second challenge probably with that you encounter when you describe your data is your file format description. So it's not so much a description, but your choice of file format. So as I said with the FAIR principles before, the format should be interoperable. So different software, hardware, and operating systems should all be able to work with your data. And sometimes that can be quite a challenge, but it's something to bear in mind if you work on a data set. Then the last bit is the reuse potential, and I think it's really, really nice that is included in the JOHD papers, because it sort of gives you a bit of a wider view on what you do. So quite often we get stuck in what we do ourselves in our little world in a way. And I think if from the outset we think, how could someone who's not in my specific subfield also profit from this data, we can actually prevent some duplicate efforts and research waste. And hopefully it will lead to new studies and other analyses on the same data, but with a different viewpoint in a way. So that's the ideal, right, if you can. But here the challenge obviously is to think outside of your own discipline or project context and make sure that you sort of widen your objective in a way. So I think very short and sweet, if you're working with data, I would say write it up, right from the start, write down your decisions, think about FAIR principles, try and design your data set as much as you can. Also think about how you can safeguard the quality of your data and document your methodology as well. And on the right, you see repositories that JOHD supports. There's more than these, but those are a few of the obvious, like the usual suspects, let's say. And I think if you have a browse and have a look, you'll probably find one that suits your data as well. And then once you've got all of that in place, I would say start writing and then submit. I think, yeah, it sounds difficult, but it's not all that difficult. It's just you have to sit down and do the work, I think. And then to close off, this is an example of our morphologically annotated data. So you get something more concrete. So this is what we wrote a data paper about and what we deposited in the Saddler repository as well. Thank you. And I guess we'll take questions now.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you.
This was brilliant and really comprehensive and helpful. Right, so we have received some questions in advance. So we will be starting from those and any new ones that you contributed. So I'll just share my screen so you can see the questions. It might be easier this way. First one, I would say for Tanya, I'm interested in discussing timelines for publishing from an initial submission to publication. I can also say a few words afterwards if you like.
Yeah, sure. So I think it depends because there's a lot of steps that go into a publication, right? So you have the submission. Then an editor has to pre-check your paper to make sure, for instance, your data is actually accessible in a publicly available repository and a few other things as well. Then it goes into the review phase, and that's where sometimes timelines can diverge because if reviewers are busy, it might take a little bit longer. It might take longer. If you're in a niche area, it might take longer to find reviewers for your paper as well. But I think, so the reviewing phase, then you get a chance to respond to the reviews and revise your manuscript depending on what the reviewers thought about it. And then there's copy editing and production. So I think altogether we usually say it's between 12 and 16 weeks, which for a journal article is actually quite fast. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add that there is information on our website about statistics for the journal. So if you go onto the About Journal and then Journal Statistics, you'll see that last year time from submission to publication was on average 84 days. So that's under 3 months. But as Tanya said, sometimes it can take 4 months or even longer, depending on the complexity. And the one thing that you can do to help speed things up is to suggest names of reviewers, of people who could be reviewing your manuscript, because this is sort of pretty standard practice in academic publishing. You are best placed to know the experts in the field. Obviously, they should not have a conflict of interest, and that would certainly help the editors match your manuscript with reviewers. Okay, we have another question. Do you require submissions to be in Word? What about LaTeX? Okay.
Both are acceptable. So
yeah.
both are acceptable. There is, at the end of the process, there are slightly different requirements. So with a Word file, if you submitted your Word file, including all the figures, you're good. If you do LaTeX, at the end, we require you to submit all your tech and your BibTeX files. So production can actually use those to ready your manuscript for publication online.
Yeah, and I can just add that we have templates for both on our submissions page. If you go to submissions and how to submit, you will see the templates here, as well as lots of more information and guidelines that we recommend you check. Yeah. Okay, that was quick. So let's see, we have a question about data sets. Okay, that's always interesting. So this one's for me. Are there specific requirements or recommendations from JOHD regarding which repository we should use to archive our data sets? This was addressed by Tanya. I'm happy to share you again that there are recommendations and no strict requirements of specific repositories to use, although what we do ask is that your dataset is deposited in a repository that assigns a persistent identifier and has long-term preservation, ensures long-term preservation of the data. So you go on to your submissions and repositories. We have a list of repositories that we recommend because they do tick those boxes. Most of these repositories assign DOIs, although not all of them, but they do need to assign some handle, a unique persistent identifier to the dataset. That's important because we do need to identify the dataset that you're describing or talking about in your paper in a unique way, a specific version of that data in particular. This list is not exhaustive, so you can use other repositories. If your institution, for example, has a repository that you need to use, of course, do that. But these are sort of generic ones. Dataverse has an instance for JOHD, so you can use that, but you can also use other ones like Figshare, Zenodo. And we also have Cellular here, Dance, one of the Clarin repositories. Yeah, so if you do have a recommendation for a repository to be added to this list, as long as it contains, it sort of displays this information, feel free to send it over to the journal's contact details, and then we'll definitely consider it. By the way, to contact the journal, you can either fill in this form or email directly either myself as editor-in-chief or Patrick Higgins, who is the Ubiquity Press contact. Right.
I see, Barbara, Zhong has a question in the chat. Should we quickly address that one?
I don't seem to have access to the chat. That sometimes
happens. Should I read it out? Teams, I'm happy to read it out.
Yeah,
I put it in the document, so it's.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, they are being
Thanks,
fed
Sophia.
into the document.
That's okay.
So we will. Okay, great. Thanks, Sophia. Okay, this is a question that we tend to be asked. So because it's a journal of open humanities data, we do need the data set to be open. The question here specifically is about the timing. So we do ask our reviewers to check the data set for basic information. So we do need the data set to be openly available. If that's not possible for good reasons that you need to explain, then we can make we need to give private access to it to the reviewers. But normally we would expect the data set to be available at the point where you submit the manuscript. Yeah, as I said, this is really, really strong preference, because the cases where we would not have that are very few, and they need to be justified. If you're worried about your data being stolen, I mean, consider that the publication timelines are quite short, and as long as the data set has your name to it, people need to credit you as the author anyway. And then so that once the data set is openly available, shortly after, you'll have the data paper that cites it, and then you'll have a full range of resources to credit your contribution. Do you have any more to add, Tanya?
No, I think one thing we could mention, so what I've had before as well, is that not the whole data set can be made publicly available, but that only a subset is being made available, sort of as almost like a proof of concept, but the description will contain the full data set description. So that is also something that happens in case of copyright issues, for instance. So there are ways around some of the issues that we discussed, but yeah, at least part of it needs to be available so we can see the data is actually there.
Yeah, exactly. And can also add brief note that as Tanya said, sometimes metadata can be made available only, sometimes a portion of the data set, but we need to see all efforts being made to make the data as open as possible and as closed as necessary, according to the principles of open research. And yeah, if there are serious reasons for copyright, ethical reasons, privacy reasons why the data cannot be made available, usually at least the metadata portion or anonymized version of the data can be made available. Okay, so we got a question about the options and journal policy and how the authors could make the data available. So that could refer to the licenses that we talked about earlier, and there is a range of options at your disposal for choosing the right license for your data set. Licensing is quite a rich topic that we can't fully exhaust here, but I can maybe show you a few resources that could help you. Let's see. So this is so license selector from GitHub that shows you different options for licenses, depending on any restriction you may want to apply on how the data is shared further or attributed or used in a commercial context. And then we have an overview here from the UK Data Service website that explains the different options. And then there's also this license picker by Open University, which you might also find helpful. But yeah, there's lots of resources to support your choice. Sometimes the choice is made is forced by conditions on your grant or funder. And sometimes it's a question of thinking about what you want people to be able to do with your data and what restrictions you want to apply. And then we have another question. I want to know how to go from Excel sheet to dataset people other than me understand how to use.
Yeah, that's quite a difficult question. So I don't think we can do this in full detail. I think, so one thing that is always good, if you document your data set, right, you will have at least something like a README where you explain what, for instance, in an Excel sheet, what your different columns will mean, for instance, and what kind of values they can contain. So that would already help a researcher that is not familiar with your particular data set to make sense of what is there. But I think ultimately, in a way that the onus is on you as the owner to make sure that someone who wants to reuse your data set actually gets enough information either in a README or in your data paper to then be able to reuse what you've actually produced. But I think there's no straight answer, like there's no one way to go from an Excel sheet, for instance, to, I don't know, a database or whatever you want to make it into, because that is really, really dependent on a case-by-case basis. I think, to be honest, Excel is probably not preferred because it's not necessarily interoperable, but you can always save an Excel file as a CSV file, for instance, and that is something that is more shareable across different operating systems as well. So I don't know if you have anything to add, Barbara, because you work with data as well, right? So
yeah. No, I think you've exhausted the topic as much as we can in this session, and it really, as I said, it's a case by case decision. I was looking at the next one, which is a new question that we got today. Which is, are there any size requirements for the data? For instance, what is acceptable range starting from megabytes up to what maximum limit? Okay, so it's interesting. The question seems to be more concerned about the upper range than the lower range. But yeah, I can sort of answer in both directions. So there isn't a requirement for the size. We've published a range of different sizes. The important thing is that the data set has value for the community and potential for reuse. So it can be a small data set, but if you've enriched it with, painfully detailed extra information that others will find valuable, then it's worth publishing, even if it's just a few dozen lines, a few hundred lines in a table. That's just one example. On the other extreme, we've also published very large data sets. Normally those tend to be automatically generated or processed. And I would say there is not necessarily a limit. I would like to point you to a publication that we have done. It's very recent. It's a chapter in a book. Let me find the actual website, and then I will show you. It's an open access book, and in the chapter we have analyzed the data sets of described in JOHD data papers. Just want to get, I don't seem to get to the open access version. Let me dig a bit deeper, because we've done a sort of quantitative analysis looking at different sizes and how they correlate by field and type of data. So looking, I think I found it, looking at whether there's any trends in how data was automatically versus manually generated, how that differs depending on classics, history, information science, and so on, and how also what type of data it is, it's textual, visual, etc., etc. Right, yes. Okay, so here is the chapter. So it's called Open Data Adoption Across the Humanities, and it's part of the AI and Smart Data for Cultural Heritage volume. And you can browse the paper, a little bit of self-promotion, but also showing how in JOHD we actually do research on open humanities data. We don't just publish manuscripts. That's also one of the things I'm most proud of. The journal is able to contribute to the community in a sort of in a scientific way in this sense as well. So here is the journal's growth, okay, against the other data journal for the humanities at the time. Here we can see data set size by macrofield. So Yeah, we don't have the numbers here, but we looked at whether, you know, whether there is a sort of association, and we tend to see sort of social science data sets being generally bigger, but also NLP ones. We also looked at size of the data set versus size of the files, which I think the question was specifically about, because sometimes you can have a large file, but that's in terms of size, because it's images, for example, could be few records, or you may have lots of records, but relatively lightweight file sizes. So I invite you to have a look at this chapter if you're interested in this topic. But yeah, to answer, I hope that answered your question. So there is no limit. I'll go on to the next one. This is a general question about the editorial process. So if you happen to disagree with any of the reviewers' comments in your paper, what is the best way to address this in your revision or report of revisions done? Great question. So just a little reminder for those who are not sort of familiar with the editorial process, we get reviews, and then we, as editors, communicate those reviews to the authors alongside any additional editorial comments. We ask the authors to revise their manuscript according to reviews, and also produce a response to reviewers point by point. Now, it can be that you don't agree with a particular comment of the reviewers, as long as you argue your case in your response to reviewers and or in the paper itself. This will be considered by the editor, and usually it's the editor who makes a final decision, or who makes obviously final decision, but who will also assess your response to reviewers. We don't tend to resend those to the reviewers. So as long as you make a convincing case, you're probably going to be accepted, or otherwise it might be a back and forth with the editor on that particular point. Okay, last question. Maybe Tanya can start with that one, otherwise I'm speaking too much. To avoid desk rejection, what advice would you give to a PhD candidate who does not have access to a supportive network of colleagues or supervisors, or even who is not from an academic background and may not know some of the unspoken rules of academia?
That's a good question as well. So I think first and foremost, we don't do a lot of desk rejection. So I think one of the things that will prompt a desk rejection is if you did not use our template, for instance. That's like a no-go. There is a template for a reason, so we invite you as an author to please use that. And also, if your data is not accessible, we'll probably first ask you, okay, where's your data? Can you send us the link? And if you send us that link, we'll still consider your paper. But if you cannot show us that the data is actually accessible, then eventually you might have to say, I'm sorry, but before it's not deposited, we can't do much with your paper. So desk rejections don't happen very often. But I think the question also goes a bit deeper, because it talks about desk rejection, but it also talks about people who don't have a lot of support, right? PhD students who might not know how to work out how they can publish their data, for instance. And I think my advice would be if you can go to conferences, or if you can go into like discussion groups or something similar on the internet, try and find people in your area of research and talk to them, like talk to people outside of your institution. If that's something that doesn't work for you, if inside the institution you will not get that dialogue, because most people out there are usually very happy to talk about their expertise and to sort of give advice and discuss, bounce ideas around, let's say. So I think my advice on that second bit would be, don't be afraid to approach people you might not know yet, but who you know will have something to share with you, hopefully. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. This is great. So are there more questions from Calvin or John? Apologies, I can't see the chat. So do let me know if anyone is writing.
There are no more questions in the chat, but maybe they have some now they can ask.
I have no more questions, guys. Okay. I just found that really, really helpful and supportive. So thank you, Barbara and Tanya, for your work here. It's been, I certainly appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Great.
More than welcome.
Thank you. That's great to hear. So then I'll just wrap up with a few pointers about the journal. And I don't. All right, so let me just share my screen again. By the way, earlier I showed you the link to the template. Further down, you can see in the submissions page that you have links to the LaTeX and Word file templates for both data papers and discussion papers. And I want to show you our online presence so you can keep up to date with what we're up to in a variety of different ways, depending on your preference. So we are on X. So here is the link. Then we're also on Instagram. And we have a LinkedIn account. Oh, this has been closed, but we do have a LinkedIn account. We have a YouTube account as well, and I encourage you to use this as a set of resources to learn more about the journal and about data papers in general. So we have a range of videos explaining the difference between traditional research paper, data papers, or about our peer review process. We also have interviews with our copy editors or with authors, or special collection videos. We also have the recording of the anniversary event that we had last summer, last September, and also sort of short videos from that. So yes, do keep an eye on our videos if you prefer to watch rather than read. And we also have a WeChat channel. So it's maintained by our team members based in China. So we hope that's helpful too. And finally, we have a newsletter which you can sign up to from this link, but you can also see past newsletters on our website. So for example, the last one contained various updates, including calls for papers of special collections that we published, as well as team updates and events that we've organized or taken part in. So we do send those about twice a year, so not incredibly frequent. So if you sign up, you won't be spammed by us, but it's also a way to have a bit more space to talk about what we've been up to, and also we'll be soliciting feedback from all of you. I will want to thank you. Thank Sophia for organizing this event. It's been a lot of work, and I'm very grateful for all your help, and to Tanya for giving this wonderful talk. Bye bye everyone.